또 과미도 언제 디스턴트 멘트 나 죽고 좀 그래. 벌거 완전 변해. 초용야자 도스 강해.
So, since many of you have come to the Kala Chakra initiation, I've thought that it would be easier for you to attend if I give a teaching here. And so many of you who have come from Tibet, I have actually the teaching that I am giving today and tomorrow, I intended for you. So your spirit for Tibet, the Tibetan spirit within the Tibetans inside Tibet are very strong and amazing. And with regard to the teaching of the Buddha, we are following. It is followed in China proper, and there are over 400 million people following Buddhism in China proper. And the tradition, Buddhist tradition that the Chinese follow are same as the one we follow in Tibet since the time the Tibetan king Sangpo. The teaching of the Nalanda tradition spread in Tibet, and in the 7th century, when Songtsen Gampo married the two princesses, one from Nepal and the other one from China, they also brought, as part of the gift from their parents, two statues of the Buddha, Shakyamuni. But despite that familial relation that the Tibetans had with China and Nepal, when it came to bringing Buddhism to Tibet, the Tibetan Emperor Tizong Detsen, the Dharma King Tizong Detsen, actually found that it was better to bring it directly from India, and so he found that there were many different masters who came from the Nalanda monastic institution, such as Master Nagarjuna and so forth. And then in the 8th century, during the time of the Tibetan Emperor Tizong Detsen, the Dharma King Tizong Detsen, he found it better good to bring Buddhism from the Nalanda monastic institution by inviting Master Chandrakshita, who was the topmost scholar at that time in Nalanda. And so Buddhism was established on the Tibetan soil during that time. And so with regard to Master Chandrakshita, what kind of person was he? So of course the great beings who left legacy for the Dharma, it's not that they were renowned as great beings, but if we can actually see their greatness if we read the text written by them, so their works. And so many of the Indian masters considered these writings of the Nalanda masters to be the source of knowledge. And these writings of the Nalanda masters actually show us the essence of the teaching of the Buddha based on reason and logic. And so in the past, we had the tradition of praising or praying to the what were known as the six ornaments and two sublime beings. And so with regard to Chandarakshita, regarding his own writings of Madhyamaka tradition, there is the ornament of Madhyamaka. And then the unique feature of this text is that it shows the common grounds of both the what are common to both the Chittamatra, the mind-only school, and the Madhyamaka school. And then with regard to logic and epistemology, he wrote the Tattva Samgraha, a marvelous text. So if you look at these texts written by him, you can see his greatness as a great of scholarship. And so such a master was invited by the Tibetan king, Dharma king Chesung Detsen, to Tibet. And so the pure Nalanda tradition was established in Tibet. And so at that time, during the time of Chesung Detsen, the Samye monastery was founded based on the Buddhist cosmos, with the four main continents and their subcontinents and so forth. And so within that Samye monastic institution, there was the department of the monastics, and then the Department of Translation, which carried out the translation of the words of the Buddha and their exegetical commentaries, treatises. And then, since the time of Songtsen Gampo, there were Chinese masters, Chinese monks, and with whom, because of this connection with China, they were living in Tibet. And so, for them, the Department for Unwavering Concentration, called the Unwavering Concentration, was established. So these Chinese elders or monks focused mainly on single-pointed meditation. And so, acknowledging the Chinese practitioners, under the auspices of Chandarakshita, the monastic, the concentration department was founded, and then. So from amongst these Chinese practitioners who were in Tibet at that time, there were few who actually said, and gradually came to the idea or assertion that to gain enlightenment, mere concentration and thoughtlessness of practice is enough, and it's not necessary to study philosophical texts. And so even today we have such people with such beliefs in Japan, perhaps, and so at that time, in the 8th, 9th centuries, there were Chinese masters who said that we don't need to do any study of the teaching of the Buddha, but merely through meditation. I mean, mere meditation is enough. And therefore, just as Chandarakshita had left his advice before he passed away, later on, Kamalashila, his student, was invited to Tibet. And so both of these masters, Chandrakshita and Kamalashila, his student, were the followers of, or the proponents of Madhyamaka, Savatantrika Madhyamaka tradition. And Kamalashila wrote his text on epistemology, which is actually a commentary on the Tattva Samgraha by his master Chandrakshita. And so just following the advice of these masters who came from Nalanda, Tibetans for generations have kept up with the Nalanda tradition, which involves studying the teaching of the Buddha through logic and epistemology. And so there are many people who follow the teaching of the Buddha. It's been in China and other parts of the world, such as Burma, Thailand, and so forth. So there are many Buddhist countries, and there are many followers of the teaching of the Buddha. But with regard to the Nalanda tradition, which uses logic and epistemology to demonstrate the points of practice, the philosophical assertions and so forth, it is only extant in the Tibetan tradition and not others. So we give great emphasis to do extensive study right from the beginning when our students are taught the collected topics, which emphasizes, this emphasizes the study of logic and reasoning. So in the footsteps of, as the legacy was left by Master Chandrakshita and his disciple, for over 1,000 years, we the Tibetans have kept the tradition of Nalanda, Buddhist tradition, alive. And many Tibetan masters also have written their own treatises. And similarly in Mongolia, a similar trend of the teaching of the Buddha was had spread and was followed. So the Buddhist tradition that we have in the Tibetan tradition is one of the purest teaching of the Nalanda tradition, or the teaching of the Buddha. But today, although the situation inside Tibet, within the Gelug monasteries, the major Gelug monasteries inside Tibet, such as Seradepungandin, there are lots of problems for the people there to keep up with our tradition. But in the Kham area and the Amdo area, the situation is better. And so I have intended to give this teaching for these 2 days with the people who have come from Tibet. And tomorrow I'll give our Lokiteshvara initiation as well. So the teaching that we are going to do. His Holiness is wondering if there is a print, the text for the teaching have been printed for distribution or not. So it seems they are not printed. So in that case, since you don't have the text with you, you won't have the text, you would have to have retentive, unforgettable memory. sounds telling the monks to serve tea. And most of the people who are serving tea should go down rather than on stage. So first, inconceivable are the qualities of the Buddha, Dharma, and inconceivable are the Sangha. So I make offering of this butter and tea to these inconceivable ones, which would have the consequences which are inconceivable. 참여? 참여? 아메? 자동차. 동. 가버니. 아. 티셔. So the teachings that we're going to do today are the middle volume of Stages of the Meditation by Kamalashila, and then the 37 practices of Bodhisattvas. So why I chose these two is that the first text was written by Kamalashila in Tibet, and then the time when he wrote it was at a time when there were Chinese practitioners, Chinese monks, who emphasized meditation, single-pointed meditation, rather than any study of the teaching. And therefore, to counter that, as invited by the Tibetan king Tizong Detsen, Kamalashila had a discussion with the Chinese practitioners, and as a result of that, then he wrote this text. And so, firstly, Kamalashila was invited by Tizong Detsen, the Tibetan emperor, and then the one who requested this text to be written was also the king himself. So Tizong Detsen, as requested by King Tizong Detsen, and Kamalashila accordingly wrote it. It has a special connection with us Tibetans as well. And then Master Dipankara Shrijana, Master Atisha, who came to Tibet and wrote the Lamp for the Path of Enlightenment. But the difference between this text The difference is that Chisong Detsen actually had an influence on the whole of Tibet. Tibet, which was one of the three empires, Mongol, China, and Tibet. And so the emperor, the religious emperor, Chisong Detsen, who requested this teaching, was someone who was really of a high caliber, whereas it was someone who had a very great authority. And whereas the one who requested Adisha to write the Lamp for the Path of Enlightenment was one of the descendants of the Tibetan emperors, and it was requested at a time when Tibet was at its low ebb and politically. And it was so weak that even the Ladakh king had defeated Tibetan. So sometimes I joke with the Ladakhis that at that time, even though Ladakh was a small kind of kingdom, you defeated the Ngari chieftain. Of course, Adisha was known to have been born in the family lineage of Chandarakshita himself as well, but so this text that these monks brought contains three texts. The two that we are going to go through, there's the ones mentioned, and the three principal aspects of the path. And so it's on the said, this is also good for distribution. So although Adisha was a greatly renowned master, but regarding the writings, Kamalashila and Chandarakshita have written classic texts on philosophy, whereas Adisha wrote and didn't write such great texts like them. So, of course, Adisha was instrumental in helping with the translation of Viveka's Tarkajvala, the Blades of Reasoning, into Tibetan. And so, regarding this, the middle volume of the Stages of Meditation is a text which was requested by the Tibetan Emperor Chisong Detsen, and it was written by Kamalashila in Tibet. And so this actually is a comprehensive text for an introduction to the teaching of the Buddha. So the Stages of Meditation written by Kamalashila has these three parts. The first part, the initial part, it deals with signal body concentration, and the middle one brings both together, Vipassana and Shamatha, and then the third part focuses on the Vipassana. And then the 37 Practices of Bodhisattvas was written by someone who was contemporary of Buddhan Rinpoche, the omniscient Buddhan Rinpoche, and master, and that master was Thokme Sangpo. So his daily practice, in his day-to-day life, he was someone renowned for practicing bodhicitta. And so there are the stories about him. It is said that the Thokme Sangpo and Budun Rinpoche met, and Budun Rinpoche had some problem with his legs. And Budun Rinpoche had said that to Thokme Sangpo that you are a Bodhisattva, and therefore please bless my legs by touching it with your hands. And so there are such stories. And Thokme Sangpo, this author of the 37 Practices of Bodhisattvas, also has written bigger texts like the commentary on Sutra Alamkara and so forth. And so in this 37 Practices of Bodhisattvas, he gives verses for different practices. And so how to engage in the study of go through the threefold process of listening to the teaching, and then reflecting on the teaching, and meditating is laid down in the stages of meditation, which shows the basis, the path, and the results of the practice. And then how to put the whole thing into practice is given in the 37 Practices of the Bodhisattvas. And so in this one text that was distributed, we came across a third text, which is the three principal aspects of the path, written by Master Tsongkhapa. So this deals with the 3 points, which are the determination to be free, and the bodhicitta, the altruistic intention or aspiration, and then the correct view. So it is a comprehensive text, a big summing up the practice of the teaching of the Buddha. And so Master Tsongkhapa was someone who was one of the greatest masters, even in his own time. So he wrote great treatises such as the commentary on Mula Madhyamaka Karika by Nagarjuna, and commentary on Chandrakirti's Madhyamaka Avatara. So he wrote this commentary on Mula Madhyamaka Karika, which mainly is based on Buddha Palita commentary, and then he also draws from Chandrakirti's clear words, as well as Bhaviveka's Madhyamaka text. And then he also wrote a commentary on Madhyamaka Avatara, which is based on the auto-commentary by Chandrakirti himself on the Madhyamaka Avatara. So if you read these two texts, these two commentaries by Chandrakirti, by Master Tsongkhapa, you'll find that Rinpoche, Tsongkhapa, has written these commentaries following, even in his wordings, the wordings that are given in or found in the Indian classical treatises that were mentioned earlier. And then when it comes to difficult points, dealing with difficult points, unlike other masters who give very extensive commentaries when things were easy, but they were very brief at the difficult points, which needs more explication. But Rinpoche is opposite. He actually dealt with, or deals in his commentaries, deals with the difficult points extensively. And therefore, it's quite right to call him the crown jewel of the scholars of Tibet. And then these three principal aspects of the path was requested by Tsako Mbongon Chakpa. So we'll not say many different prayers. This is a praise to the perfection of the perfection of wisdom, which is the mother of all the Buddhas. Yatha gade para sangha de bodhi swaha. Yatha gade para sangha de bodhi swaha. This is the verse of salutation from Abhisamaya Alankara, clear ornament of clear realization by Maitreya, which is paying homage to the mothers of the Shravakas, Pratyeka Buddhas, Bodhisattvas, and the Buddhas, the realization. And this is the verse of salutation from Lamadhyamaka Karika by Master Nagarjuna, but paying homage to the Buddha for teaching dependent origination free from the 8 extremes. So I don't know if we need to offering of mandala or not. Whether you recite the verse of mandala or not, but if you actually intend to offer your body, speech, mind resources and so forth, if you could intend to make offering of them, that would do. So whatever religious or spiritual discourses we engage in, we need to have the correct motivation, whether on the part of the teacher who gives the teaching, so on his part, in his or her part, he should not expect offerings for giving teachings, and also should not have any kind of a jealousy towards others. Although doing these would amount to accumulating negative karmas, although one may be teaching the Dharma. And then from the side of the disciples and the audience, you may think that, I have received the teaching from the Dalai Lama, and therefore you might feel yourself somebody important, and therefore think that you could also give teachings to others. That's wrong, and because people could even sometimes think that they could do business with Dharma. That is totally wrong. And so, on the part of the teacher, there should not be this the thought or the wish to be to show off their scholarship, or to be known to others as a scholar, and to gain wealth and so forth. And so, with regard to the teaching that we have, it comes down through the lineage masters, beginning with the Buddha, and then the masters like Nagarjuna and Asanga and so forth, through whom these two masters, the later masters, we have the extensive. The lineage of the extensive path and of conduct, and the lineage of the profound view. So, with regard to myself, you could think that the Dalai Lama actually practices the true principles of the profound view of emptiness and that of the altruistic aspiration of bodhicitta. And so this is what I do, and I dedicate whatever merit I gain for the benefit of others on a day-to-day basis, and just as the Buddha has taught us. And so, in following in the footsteps of the Buddha himself, not only leaving it to my study of the teaching, but also reflecting on the meaning of the teaching, and as a result of which, I don't think I'm being arrogant here, or I have seen transformation within myself by applying the teaching. So I could actually, I have the conviction that if you really practice sincerely the teaching of the Buddha, you can make transformation within your mind. And therefore, you could actually think that I'm going to follow in the footsteps of the Dalai Lama, and I will follow and heed his advice. And so on a day-to-day basis, I'll do like that. This is what you should motivate, you should motivate yourself, how you should motivate yourself. And then we'll say the prayer, which says, I take refuge in the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, the Supreme Assembly, until I'm enlightened. And by the practice of giving and the perfections, may I become a Buddha to benefit all beings, sentient beings. And so, your intention of the taking refuge in the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha is to reach enlightenment, particularly that of the highest enlightenment, that is the Buddhahood, which is also the highest status of being. And so with that, we cover the practice of taking refuge in the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. And so as a result of taking refuge in these causal refuges, you should also have the aspiration to have the experience of true Dharma within yourself, so thereby becoming a true Sangha, and then eventually attaining the state of Buddhahood, which is qualified by the four Buddha bodies. So with that aspiration to attain the true Dharma, true Sangha, and true Buddhahood within yourself, you should take refuge in the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. Sometimes many of us, of course, what we do is that when it comes to thinking about the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, they would think that they are somewhere out there, and without really understanding the teaching of the Buddha well, you could even have the notion that they are like the Creator God, a Creator God, who could do anything for us, and that we do not need to make any move from our side. That's not the case with Buddhism. But the Buddha himself has said that the sages do not wash away the sins of sentient beings, nor do they take away the suffering of sentient beings, remove the suffering of sentient beings, nor do they shift their own realizations into others. And so the Buddhas, Shakyamuni has said that the Buddhas cannot help sentient beings by washing their sin or non-virtuous actions, like washing away dirt from our body and so forth, nor can they remove the suffering of sentient beings with their hands. And also that the Buddhas cannot gift us with their realization. But how do the Buddhas serve sentient beings then? By showing the reality, the truth of reality as it is. All of us have what is said in the Mahayana Uttara Tantra, that we have the basic nature, luminous nature of the mind, which is in its intrinsic nature is not stained by any defilements. And therefore, the defilements are in such a nature that they could be eliminated from the mind stream, or separated and eliminated from our mind stream. So although the defilements are there which cover our mind, but the mind in its intrinsic nature is not stained by them. And therefore, on the basis of that basic quality or potential, what we need to do, as I said yesterday also, that we need to gain insight into the nature of the mind, And therefore, by knowing and gaining insight into this nature, the true nature of the mind itself, one would eliminate those of the negative emotions and also the stains, defilements that are left by them as well. And so, for the sentient beings who are poor and overcome with suffering, so of course, sentient beings have suffering, such as suffering in the as animals and so forth. But we need to see if there are any causes, the suffering has its cause or not, and if there are any counter factors to these. And then we have to also see whether these antidotes that counter the negative emotions have the valid support from knowledge, and also the faults of these negative emotions have any support from valid knowledge or not. And regarding the counterfactors, I mean, of course, the more we analyze them, I mean, we could find that they actually have the valid basis of knowledge. Whereas the negative emotions, for example, the more we analyze them, and of course, when we are overcome with anger or attachments, we may find them to be very powerful, and what we actually perceive when we are in those states of mind as being true. But I mean, most of us also, of course, have the experience of anger, for example. So when you are very intensely angry, how does the person or thing whom you are angry at actually look like? If you just, even hearing the name of that person with whom you are angry, I mean, that would provoke more anger in you. So this is what happens with us. Whereas the person may be the same whom you have been angry with or at. If you hear something positive about that person from another person, I mean, that anger, the intense anger that you had, could be reduced the next day. And so the person is the same, but because of our wrong perception, the exaggerated way of looking at the person, we tend to have those reactions, the negative reactions, because you find the person is actually harming or being in your way to achieve something. So this is with regard to anger or hatred. But then when you actually find someone doing something good to you, then you get attached to the person. The attachment grows within yourself. So because of some way of, some sort of a fantasizing or exaggerated way of looking at the person, we either become too excited with anger or attachment. And so when you become angry at the person, and what happens because of that exaggerated way of looking at the person is that you see the person to be absolutely negative. And with attachment, you see the person to be absolutely attractive. And therefore, in Nagarjuna's Mula Madhyamaka Karika, it is very clearly mentioned how this exaggerated conception actually leads us to have anger and hatred towards others. And even today, even scientists say that when you are angry at somebody, the 90% of that anger is your own mental projection. And so this is what Master Nagarjuna refers to as the improper mentation. He says that from conception arises attachment, anger, and confusion. So they arise from a distorted way of looking at things and beings. And so my friend, a scientist friend, when he talked about anger, he explained to me like that as a scientist. And then when I asked, what about attachment? And he actually said that that is okay, nothing negative. And so this is what usually people regard, that attachment or desirous attachment is something that is okay. And so Aaron Beck, the scientist, said that it's a different case with regard to attachment. So in any case, he says that 90% of our perception of the person whom we are angry at is as absolutely negative is our own mental projection. So we need to actually go to the root of what actually gives rise to that exaggerated outlook. It is grasping at some kind of independent, true existence, objectively existing. So something which is independent of anything else. So if you're able to destroy that independentness in the object, then you will be able to destroy the foundation of your attachment and anger. And so Master Nagarjuna says, elimination of karma and delusions is, by eliminating it, there is liberation, and karma and delusions arise from conceptual thought, and this in turn arises from some way of, fabricated way of looking at things, and then they can be overcome by through emptiness. And so, with regard to the teaching of the Buddha taught the Four Noble Truths, and each of these Four Noble Truths are also explained in connection with the four attributes each. 16 attributes in all. And then that was the teaching of the first sermon of the Buddha. And then in the second turning of the wheel of Dharma, the Buddha elaborated on true cessation and true selflessness. And then in the third turning of the wheel of Dharma, there are many different sutras, the words of the Buddha, the discourses of the Buddha, and one of them is the Tathagata Garbha Sutra, which teaches, I think, the non-inherent nature of the mind itself, and also it uses the terms like clear light, so which refers to the subjective mind of clear light. And so, subjective mind of enlightenment itself is the one, factor that is used in tantric practice. And so, in many of the the discourses of the third turning wheel of Dharma, this subjective clear light is taught. So this is, when we, with reference to the three turnings of the wheel of Dharma, this is how we should understand. The Thailand Brahma and so forth follow mainly the teachings pertaining to the first turning of the wheel of Dharma. So they focus on the study, reflection, and meditation on the teachings found in this. As I said earlier, when it comes to demonstrating the truth of what is taught in the perfection of wisdom teachings, we need to use reason and logic, not just follow the authority of the words of the Buddha itself and faith alone, but we need to use logic. So for that we need the dialectical, the path of reasoning in order to gain insight into the Madhyamaka view. And therefore, in Tibet, there has been great emphasis on the study of logic, such as the teaching, the works of Dignaga, and such as the works of Dignaga, like Pramana Samuchaya, the compendium of epistemology and logic, and also Dharmakirti's treatises on logic. And so this tradition of studying the teaching of the Buddha through logic and reasoning exists only amongst the Tibetan traditions and not in Chinese or Korean Buddhist traditions. So with regard to the teaching of the Buddha, all the different strands of teaching of the Buddha, whether Pali or Sanskrit, consider the negative emotions to be something that is faulty. And so, as I said earlier, we have this tradition of studying the Madhyamaka view or through logic and reasoning, and therefore, regarding the Madhyamaka view or philosophical view, we have Master Tsongkhapa's texts, such as his commentary, The Ocean of Reasoning, which is a commentary on Mula Madhyamaka Karika, and his Elucidation of the Thought, which is a commentary on the Madhyamaka Avatara by Chandrakirti, and and so, when it comes to the Madhyamaka view, Master Tsongkhapa says that the most difficult point in understanding the Madhyamaka philosophy is that of the assertion that things are merely designated. And so if you study these texts written by Master Tsongkhapa, you will be able to gain quite a good understanding of the view of emptiness according to the Madhyamaka philosophical view. And then with regard to the quotation that I cited earlier from Nagarjuna's Mula Madhyamaka Karika, the final line which says, and that fabrication is ended by emptiness. Instead of saying by emptiness, it could also be read, according to the Sanskrit version interpretation, it could be read as the fabrications could be dissolved within the emptiness. So we're going to go through these texts. So the teaching of the Buddha that has spread in Tibet, that is extended in the Tibetan tradition, contains the entire teaching contained in, that were taught by the Buddha in his three turnings of the wheel of Dharma, which in turn means that we have the complete teaching with the teachings pertaining to the basic vehicle, then the Mahayana, and including the Tantra. So earlier I explained the verse of taking refuge and bodhicitta. So the first two lines show the taking refuge. So what this shows is that our aspiration is that of the great enlightenment of Buddhahood, and so bodhicitta is that altruistic and aspiration for the benefit of all sentient beings, to become enlightened for the benefit of all sentient beings. And so your goal of taking refuge is to become enlightened for the benefit of all sentient beings. So I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. My practice of giving and other perfections, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. We say this 3 times. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, Dharma, and the Supreme Community. By my practice of giving and other perfections, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. Through the practice of giving and other perfections, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. If you have the text, please open the middle volume of the stages of meditation. So the text gives the title first in the Indian language, Bhavanakrama, and in Tibetan, Gomrim Parpa. So homage to the youthful Manjushri, I shall briefly explain the stages of meditation for those who follow the system of Mahayana Sutras. The intelligent who wish to actualize omniscience extremely quickly should make deliberate efforts to fulfill its causes and conditions. So this passage shows the basic stand of the teaching of the Buddha, the position. And so what that means is the Buddha is not someone who is like a creator, but that the term Buddhahood connotes that of having overcome all faults, clearing all faults, and once that is achieved, then one would be able to have this complete, total knowledge of everything that exists. So in order to attain such a goal of enlightenment or omniscience, which comes through purification of one's negativities from one's mind stream, so in a gradual manner, if the Buddha were someone like a creator, a permanent, eternal being, right from the beginning, and there's no way the Buddha could go through the process of purification and gain the total knowledge of everything. This is not going to be possible. Whereas in the case of Buddha, in the case of Buddhism, what we see Buddha to be like is how we perceive the Buddha to be is that the Buddha in the beginning was like us, ordinary sentient beings, and then he went through the process of eliminating or overcoming all the negativities and defilements within himself, and thereby gaining total knowledge of everything. So the intelligent one, or the one with critical faculty. So here, do you understand something? Someone is asking the interpreter, somebody who's interpreting for the newcomers from Tibet, if he's doing his job well or not, and telling him to do well. So people from Kham and Amdo, if you after the teaching, if you had to go back to Tibet with this feeling that, of course, we attended the teaching, but we didn't understand anything. If you have to say that, then I'm not to be blamed. Your translator is. So the one with critical faculty is someone who is said to be a follower of the teaching of the Buddha through reasoning, someone who is of sharp faculty. As opposed to which there are those who are of dull faculty, who follow the teaching primarily on faith and not reason. And so the ones who are of sharp faculty are the ones who do critical analysis into the teaching. And so when you do critical analysis, what you actually do is not rely on the word, but the meaning. I mean, not rely on the person, but his words or the teaching, and not relying on the words, but the meaning. And within the meaning, not the provisional, but the definitive. And then with regard to the definitive meaning, not just an intellectual, superficial understanding, but wisdom understanding. And so someone who follows that kind of, who has that kind of attitude, I mean, does not just believe, just because it is said some teaching was given by some great being, someone who is known to be great and so forth. And so when following that person, the person is this kind of critical, the person with critical faculty does not just is not carried away by beautiful poetic expressions, but the actual essential meaning. And then with regard to the meaning, of course, here, since we are dealing with how to go about with a practice leading to liberation and omniscience, we need to focus on, we need to understand what are the provisional meanings and the definitive meanings. And so in order to understand that the sutras, the words of the Buddha, have these two aspects of the teaching, the provisional and the definitive teachings, we need to understand that with regard to the provisional teachings, there are many different ways of understanding or interpreting them. But with regard to the definitive meaning, what you need to understand is that when you analyze and try to delve into the actual reality of things, you will be able to see that nothing has any independent objective existence. And so that is the meaning of the definitive meaning. And so those teachings of the Buddha, which mainly emphasizes the ultimate truth, are known as definitive teachings, and those which principally teach or emphasizes or those of the conventional truth are known as provisional teachings. And so, when it comes to understanding the definitive meaning, which is emptiness, you need to actually go into the deeper insights, not just intellectual, superficial understanding, and therefore you should not rely on the superficial intellectual understanding, but consciousness, but then that of the wisdom understanding. So when I give teachings in the great monastic institutions, I usually say that if we were to follow the pattern of those with dull faculty, then I don't know how long the teaching of the Buddha would survive. Because people would rather follow the teaching on blind faith, as considering that this is our custom. Whereas if you were to follow the pattern of those with sharp faculty, you need to go through the threefold aspects of the teaching, which are the basis, the path, and the result. And so in order to reach the result, you need to go through the path, and then that path must be based on the understanding of the basis. That is basically the two truths. And so on the basis of understanding the two truths, then you develop the path, and the paths which comprise those of the true cessation and true path. And then through this means you reach the resultant goal of enlightenment. So there was someone is asking someone who is ex-minister from somewhere whether he is able to see His Holiness clearly or not. So when it comes to using logic and reasoning to come to the... So I was talking referring to Raja Ramana, an Indian nuclear physicist. When I met him, he told me that quantum physics is something new in the world today to the modern people. But in India, the concept of quantum physics already was discovered 2,000 years ago. As he said, he saw in the writings of Master Nagarjuna. So he said that it was very clearly mentioned or found in Master Nagarjuna's text about the concept of quantum physics. And therefore, as an Indian, he told me that he was quite this amazing called view or understanding of the nature of thing, which is something new in the contemporary world, was already discovered in India. And therefore, he felt, as an Indian, very proud. And so, if you were able to follow the pattern of the beings with sharp faculty, then there is no way anyone could question what you have to present and explain. And so, what Master Dharmakirti says in his Pramanavartika is quite true, that something that you cannot see cannot be denied its existence. You can't say that something does not exist just because you cannot see it. That's not going to be a good reason. So if we could follow the pattern of the sharp faculty, the beings of sharp faculty with regard to the teaching of the Buddha, and then in our dealing with the teaching of the Buddha, I could say that the teaching of the Buddha could survive for a few more centuries, and as it has survived for the last more than 2,000 years as well. So with regard to philosophical tenets, there are many different philosophical schools with different views. For some, the Buddha, we find the Buddha as if taught them, that there is some kind of a person who is the carrier of the load of the five psychophysical aggregates. So when he says that the five aggregates are the loads and the person is the carrier of that load. So in certain other sutras, the Buddha says karma exists, but not the person, and that the aggregates exist, but the person does not. And therefore, in the second turning of the wheel of the Dharma, it is mentioned that even the five aggregates are without any inherent existence or nature. So the reason why the Buddha gave his teaching is to help beings, people. So he taught in accordance with the mental dispositions of these disciples and the followers. And so for those for whom it was suitable for the Buddha to teach that there is some kind of a self, or he taught accordingly. Whereas for those for whom it was suitable to say that they teach that there is no external existence but the mind, he taught this accordingly. Of course, the Buddha's final view personal view is that of the fact that things have no inherent existence. And so, if it is the case that within the followers of the Buddha himself, there were these different mental dispositions, then we could also say that the followers of other traditions, religious traditions such as Christianity and Islam and so forth, because of their diverse mental dispositions, we could say that they have these teachings as well. So, in Buddhism, if you were to assert some kind of a permanent, self-evolved, independent God, then there would be lots of logical fallacies. And within the philosophical system within Buddhism, of course, the lower schools are rejected or logically by the higher ones. Progressively, the Vaibhashikas would be undermined with regard to their philosophical view by the Sautantikas, and they in turn could be undermined by Chittamatras, who in turn could be undermined by the Madhyamakas. And so it is important for us to study all these philosophical systems to gain a conviction in the final teaching of the Buddha, and to have this firm faith in the teaching of the Buddha through logic and reasoning. So I used to know one Lama who used to live in Ladakh, a very good Lama. So he has, in the Changtang area of Ladakh, the nomadic areas. So he had his monasteries. So he has nunneries and other monasteries for monks. And so, in one of my discussions with him, we had discussions about whether this Lama sends or lets his monks and nuns to the plains of India or not. And the Lama said he did not allow his monks to travel to other parts of the world, India, because they become distracted. So, if I use a very blunt, if I talk very bluntly about this Lama, I would say that following the teaching of the Buddha must not be based on blind faith, but it must be followed by understanding the teaching well. And so, in my discussions, talks with, conversation with my two late tutors, Tichang Rinpoche and Gyalsey Rinpoche, they told me that what they found in the West is that people are more or less carried away by the distractions in life, the material distractions alone. So all these glamorous things that are seen in the modern materialistic world, actually, if we could take lesson from it, they could actually teach us the lesson of seeing that things are in the nature of suffering and its origin. So if you don't have good understanding of the teaching of the Buddha, maybe then you can keep people in the dark, in their remote places. So it says here that so our mind is a compounded phenomena, and then the qualities of that we gain such as taming the mind and so forth. So taming the mind are also the compounded. And then also those are the negativities are compounded phenomena. It is not possible for omniscience to be produced without causes, because if it were, everything could always be omniscient. And so here you can see how the author uses logic, what is known as reductio ad absurdum logic. If things were produced without reliance on something else, they could exist without constraint. There would be no reason why everything could not be omniscient. Therefore, since all functional things arise only occasionally, they depend on their causes. Omniscience too is rare, because it does not occur at all times and in all places, and everything cannot become omniscient. Therefore, it definitely depends on causes and conditions. So, if things were dependent on causes and conditions, as analysis is done in Pramana Vartika by Dharmakirti, where he says, if suffering is caused by some permanent cause, or if suffering comes without causes. So he raises these questions and then answers. Also, from among these causes and conditions, you should cultivate correct and complete causes. And so, if you have to depend on causes and conditions, you need to know what are the causes and conditions bringing about the results that you see. And you need to have the correct causes, and that the causes must be complete, and so not only complete, but the causes must be correct causes. If you put the wrong causes into practice, even if you work hard for a long time, the desired goal cannot be achieved. It'll be like milking a cow's horn. Likewise, the result will not be produced when all the causes are not put into practice. For example, if seed or any other cause is missing, then the results, a sprout and so forth, will not be produced. Therefore, those who desire a particular result should cultivate its complete and unmistaken causes and conditions. And then the next passage is actually showing the humility of the author. If you ask, what are the causes and conditions of the final fruit of omniscience? I, who am like a blind man, he says, this is showing humility. May not be in a position to explain by myself, but I shall employ the Buddha's own words, just as he spoke them to his disciples after his enlightenment. And so with regard to the words of the Buddha, as I said before, there are those of the provisional and definitive teachings. And so those teachings which cannot be taken or undermined by reason, you have to take them literally, but then they are undermined by reason, those are not to be taken literally as definitive teachings. Whereas the teachings which are not undermined when it comes to their truth, when you analyze the reason, then they are definitive. And so with regard to the provisional teachings, Chandrakirti counts 10 different sutras in his commentary on Madhyamaka Avatara by himself. And so Sandhi Nimurchana Sutra is one of the provisional teachings, and also the sutra which teaches the essence being permanent and static is counted as provisional teaching. So the Sandhi Nimurchana Sutra teaches that the dependent nature and the consummate nature are definite meanings, and then Others, that of the imputed meaning, those sutras teaching the imputed nature to be provisional and so forth. So if certain teaching of the Buddha, even if it were the Buddha's words, if you can't actually, if the meaning doesn't become more and more clear, the more you test it, I mean, you cannot take them to be literal. So whatever teachings it may be, the teaching should not be contradicted by what is obviously perceptible by sense perceptions, and also with regard to the teaching, the slightly hidden should not be contradicted by that of the inference. And then, with regard to the extremely hidden phenomena, it should not be contradicted by those scriptures teaching them. And so, within the teaching of the Buddha, there are different ways in which the Buddha had taught. And some you will find internal contradictions within the teaching itself. And so, with regards to the shapes of the planets and so forth, there are different shapes mentioned in the teaching of the Buddha. And so I was reading a work of Dr. Lotsawa, and with regard to the cosmology, and as I was reading, I said that these make no sense. And then Master Vasubandhu also had mentioned the size and the distance of the moon and the sun from the earth, and the size of the moon and the earth, and so forth. But it was so what he mentions in his Abhidhamma Kosha Karika are actually what was found traditionally in the Indian traditions. And he Master Vasubandhu actually didn't go to Kanyakumari, that the southern tip of India, to measure the earth and the distance from the earth of those of the sun and the moon and so forth. So, with regard to the words of the Buddha, it should be something that could stand to the test of the reason. He said, Vajrapani, Lord of sacred, the transcendental wisdom of omniscience has its root in compassion and arises from cause, the altruistic thought, the awakening mind of Bodhisattva, and the perfection of skillful means. Therefore, if you are interested in achieving omniscience, you need to practice the three: compassion, the awakening mind of Bodhisattva, and skillful means. And moved by compassion, bodhisattvas take the vow to liberate all sentient beings. Then, by overcoming their self-centered outlook, which means self-cherishing attitude, which thinks only of oneself, one's own benefit, so with regard to the text that shows the faults of self-cherishing attitude, extreme self-centered attitude, and the advantages of cherishing others over oneself, one of the texts which clearly mentions them is Nagarjuna's Ratnavali, and also Bodhicitta Vivarana. And then, from these, based on these texts, Master Chandideva's Bodhisattvacharya Avatara, the guide to the Bodhisattva way of life, which shows the practices of Bodhisattvas. And you should actually study this text. So I received the teaching on it in 1967. So the person from whom I received his teaching, Kundalama Lama Tenzin Gyalsey from Kinor, was like a Kadampa master. And so since then, as advised to me by Kundalama Lama Tenzin Gyalsey himself, Rinpoche himself, I have been teaching this text many times. So because this text is not too long, I can actually, when I give teachings on it, I could either give a short version or short or long teaching. Whereas teaching Lamrim text is different, because sometimes you find shortage of time. And so I have benefited from this teaching, the Guide to the Bodhisattva Way of Life, so much. And there is no greater text than the Bodhisattva Charyavatara in the practice of altruism. And it is actually backed by the writings of Master Nagarjuna as well as the sutras, the words of the Buddha. So having entered, they engage eagerly and continuously in the very difficult practices of accumulating merit and insight. Having entered into this practice, they'll certainly complete a collection of merit and insight. Accomplishing the accumulation of merit and insight is like having omniscience itself in the palm of your hand. Therefore, since compassion is the only root of omniscience, you become familiar with this practice from the very beginning. And you should become. So with regard to compassion, we could actually talk about compassion between children and their mother or parents. So because of this blood relationship, people would say that, oh, this is my near and dear ones, these are my enemies, and so forth. And so these have to do with the attitudes that the people show to you, whether positive or negative. Accordingly, you make this kind of discrimination. And since you see some as near to you and others distant, and so instead of becoming compassionate, when you actually consider someone to be your adversary, someone who harms you or something, then you actually become angry at the person. And so your attitude is more or less oriented directed towards the attitude of the other person. Whereas if you understand that these beings, whether your near and dear ones or your enemies, they are all sentient beings, equally wanting happiness and not suffering, then you will not have this kind of a discrimination. So although the so-called enemy are the ones who may be harming you, but then they also are same like you in not wanting suffering but wanting happiness. And in that sense, all sentient beings are equal. So you don't say that, oh, this person is good to me, kind to me, but whatever the attitude of that person is towards you or not, but if you could actually take the point that that person is someone like me who wants happiness and not suffering, then that will actually lead to have a genuine sense of love and compassion towards the others. So if your attitude or reaction towards others is oriented and according to their attitude towards you, then you will have the attachment or anger according to whether they are kind to you or bad to you. So although the person whom you consider as your enemy may be doing something that is negative to you, that is harmful to you, but the person himself or herself as such, could be seen as someone equal to you in wanting happiness and not wanting suffering, and therefore you cannot make that distinction or discriminate. You cannot discriminate between the people as your near and dear ones or your enemies as such, because everyone is equal in wanting happiness and not suffering. So we do talk about sworn enemies they're of the Dharma and having this 10 different criteria to be considered like that. But then But with regard to these sworn enemies of the Dharma, of course, there are very exceptional cases where people who have the power to overcome them, rightly, may be able to do that. But generally speaking, we should not have mean attitude towards those whom we consider as our enemies or the sworn enemy of the Dharma and so forth, but more so that we need to be compassionate towards them. So, strictly speaking, we may not be able to call people or beings as the sworn enemy of the Dharma as such. Maybe because of being in this world, in this kind of a body that is brought about through karma and delusions, there are cases which are exceptional cases, but generally, we cannot consider others to be sworn enemies of Dharma as such. And then if there are those spirits or certain beings who are said to actually snatch away our lifespan and so forth, you cannot ask them to bring it back to you as such. When you have that attitude of wishing to bring happiness and benefit to others, so when you are totally dedicated for the well-being of others, you would actually dedicate all that you have towards the benefit of others, as Ratnavali and other texts actually mention, like becoming the sustenance of others for others, like those of the elements and so forth, as infinite and inexhaustible as the space and so forth. Accomplishing the four, since compassion is the only root of omniscience, you should become familiar with this practice from the very beginning. The Compendium of Perfect Dharma reads, O Buddha, O Buddha, Bodhisattva should train in many practices. If a Bodhisattva properly holds to one Dharma and learns it perfectly, he has all Buddha's qualities in the palm of his hands. And if you ask what that one Dharma is, it is great compassion. The Buddhas have already achieved all their own goals, but remain in the cycle of existence for as long as there are sentient beings. This is because they possess great compassion. They also do not enter the immensely blissful abode of nirvana like the hearers. So this has to do with the using, due to the power of their compassion, they do not remain in the blissful state of nirvana, and because of the power of their wisdom, they do not abide or remain in samsara. So, which is to say that they do not remain in the extreme of nirvana and the extreme of samsara. And so if, like those of the Shravaka practitioners, once they have overcome all their negativities, delusions, they are contented to remain in that peaceful state of liberation. So if you remain like that, then the Bodhisattvas cannot actually perform or give service to for the benefit of sentient beings as such. Because considering the interests of sentient beings first, they abandon the peaceful abode of nirvana as if it were a burning iron house. Therefore, great compassion alone is the unavoidable cause of non-abiding nirvana of the Buddha. And that the way of meditation and compassion will be taught from the outset. So as I said earlier, there are those whom we consider as our near and dear ones and become attached to them. And this, your compassion towards them in this way, which is biased, should be stopped. And so this attachment towards one's near and dear ones, on the one hand, should be stopped. And then your sense of enmity towards those whom you consider as your enemy and considering them as distant from you also should be stopped. And so you actually create an equanimous state of mind. Begin the practice by meditating on equanimity. Try to actualize impartiality toward all sentient beings by eliminating attachment and hatred. All sentient beings desire happiness, do not desire misery. Think deeply about how in this beginningless cycle of existence there is not one sentient being who has not been my friend and relative hundreds of times. Therefore, since there is no ground for being attached to some and hating others, I shall develop a mind of equanimity toward all sentient beings. So begin the meditation on equanimity by thinking of neutral person and then consider people who are friends and foes. So you can have on one side those whom you consider as your friends and on the other side your foes. And so you could now reflect, why do you consider some as your friends and others as your foes? And so there's no certainty that those whom you consider as your friends or foes could permanently be your foes or friends. Just as it is mentioned in the sutras that one person actually was found to actually eat the flesh of his own father, in the sense that the father had died and actually reborn as some animal whom the person actually killed and then was eating its flesh, and hating his mother who was born as his dog in his neighborhood, and so forth. So begin the meditation on equanimity. After the mind has developed equanimity towards all sentient beings, meditate on loving kindness. Moisten the mental continuum with the water of loving kindness and prepare it as you would a piece of fertile ground. When the seed of compassion is planted in such a mind, germination will be swift, proper, and complete. Once you have irrigated the mind stream with loving kindness, meditate on compassion. The compassionate mind has the nature of wishing all sentient beings, suffering beings, to be free from suffering. Meditate on compassion for all sentient beings, because the beings in the three realms of existence are intensely tortured by the three types of suffering in various forms. So regarding the three types of suffering, the Buddha, in his first sermon of the Four Noble Truths, he says, no suffering. And so the suffering here does not refer to what are obviously painful experiences that we, even as animals, know as unwanted. Looks like the Vietnamese translation is not working properly. So with regard to the three types of sufferings, the Buddha's reference of suffering, by this word, no suffering, is that of the pervasive, conditioned, existential suffering. So even as Buddhists, people in Buddhist countries love money, don't we? But of course, money and material gains are necessary in life, but being too obsessed with them is not so meaningful. So however great wealth and money and name and so forth you may have, they also bring about suffering to you. People may accumulate wealth, and then in the process also have suffering. They do suffer. So if you have one rupee or $1, you may want 10, and if you have 10, you may want 100, and then you may want 1,000 and 10,000 and so forth. And so there's suffering while you accumulate that wealth. And even if you deposit in a bank, you might think that you don't get much interest. Therefore, you would want to take it out and do some business, hoping that you would make more money than leaving it in the bank. And then your business suffers again. That very condition you consider to be a condition for happiness is a cause for suffering. So many of the things that we deal with in our life, that we have, are causes of suffering in reality. And then there is also the wealth and so forth dwindling. And the main suffering that the Buddha refers to is this conditioned existential pervasive suffering, which is the suffering which is the consequence of, which is, in other words, the 5 psychophysical aggregates, which are the results of those delusion and karma. So there was one Mongolian named Sangpo Dorji, and he actually met with some punishment because of certain wrongdoing. And so when he was actually suffering the punishment, he said that this psychophysical aggregate, which is the result of my delusion and karma, so these psychophysical aggregates, the results of karma and delusions, are in themselves in the nature of suffering, and they are also the basis of more suffering in the future. And so these are under the sway of one's karma and delusions, the psychophysical aggregates within samsara. So many of the unwanted experiences of suffering and so forth come because of this very nature of the psychophysical aggregates, which are the results of our karma and delusion, on the basis of which we further suffer. So these the pervasive conditions existential suffering is the source of the 2 other sufferings, which are the suffering of suffering and changeable suffering as well. The Buddha has said that the heat and other types of pain constantly torture beings in the hell for a very long time. He has also said the hungry ghosts are scorched by hunger and thirst and experience immense physical suffering. We can also see animal suffering in many miserable ways. They eat each other, they become angry and are hurt and killed. We can see that humans too experience various acute kinds of pain, not able to find what they want. They are resentful and harm others. They suffer pain losing beautiful things they want and confront the ugly things they do not want, as well as pain of poverty. And then the suffering in the hell realms, of course, is something that we cannot see. So, of course, we cannot say that the good things happen to us and could happen to us, but not the bad things. That's more like having a partial attitude. So many of the beings, the spirits and so forth that we consider as like maybe deities or and so forth could be actually hungry ghosts. So the last year when I was staying at in a compound, within a compound of a nunnery, it was very peaceful, and I could see deer sometimes roaming in the woods. So when I was looking at them, I found that these animals, the poor animals, cannot speak to us, and therefore, we cannot do much for them, but we could feel compassion. So sometimes some dogs come by to disturb these deers. And then I actually shooed these dogs away, but apart from that, there was nothing that much I could do, I thought. And so we could see that these animals have their own suffering of being stupid and bewildered. So we could, of course, think these animals are suffering, but if we were to be born as like them, what would happen to us? We should also reflect on that. So the suffering that the animals have, the suffering of being eaten by one another. And we can see that humans also experience various acute kinds of pain. So in the past, of course, when people did not have much material facility, they are more or less contented and remain contented. But today, because of all this progress and development in material world, I mean, we have so much distraction. And people actually indulge in whatever it takes them they could do to make money and wealth, and even indulging in corruption and even taking life of others and so forth. And so the world is infested today with corruption, this disease. And there is huge gap between rich and poor people. So today in Africa, some 4 countries or so have famine. So when I see pictures of the children, very poor and pale, and also mothers in similar conditions, it's really sad. Not being able to find what they want, they are resentful and harm each other. They suffer the pain of losing the beautiful things they want and confronting the ugly things they do not want, as well as the pain of poverty. There are those whose minds are bound by various fetters of disturbing emotions, like craving, desire. Others are in turmoil with different types of wrong views. These are all causes of misery. Therefore, they are always painful, like being on a precipice. And so, with regard to cultivating compassion, we could actually reflect on those beings who are suffering right now. And then also think about, have compassion towards those who indulge in the causes of suffering, such as attachment and anger, hatred, which is happening in the world today. When someone is able to actually show so much anger to make his ends meet, they are considered very successful and so forth. And this is very sad, unfortunate. And then even religion is used as instruments to meet one's ends. So there's religious discrimination because of religion. So this happens because people, even though following some religion, do not see the faults of our destructive emotions of anger, hatred, and so forth. And therefore, they are like servants of their negative emotions. So when we talk about these negative emotions, the negative emotions are defined as those which, no sooner they arise in our minds, disturb our peace of mind. And so we do not talk about, we don't need to say, negative emotions is something that our teaching explains, but it's from our experience we can see them to be negative. So today medical scientists say that if you have peace of mind, it helps in having good physical health as well. Whereas if you are full of anger and hatred, anxiety, and so forth, you are actually harming your own physical health as well. And so, by using scientific findings like this, we could actually introduce people to the disadvantages and the shortcomings of our negative emotions and the advantage of our positive emotions, such as compassion and so forth. So it's very important to promote that of compassion. God suffered the misery of change. For example, signs of impending death and their fall to unfortunate states constantly oppress the minds of gods of the desire realm. How can they live in peace? Pervasive suffering, pervasive misery is that what arises under the power of causes characterized by actions and disturbing emotions. It has the nature and characteristics of actions and characteristics of momentary disintegration and pervades all wandering beings, and therefore see all wandering beings as immersed in a great fire of misery. Think that they are like all like you in not desiring misery. So this shows the practice of equaling and exchanging self and others. Alas, all my beloved sentient beings are in such pain. What can I do to set them free and make their suffering known? Your own. Whether you are engaged in one-pointed meditation or pursuing your ordinary activities, meditate on compassion at all times, focusing on all sentient beings and wishing that they all be free from suffering. Begin by meditating on your friends and relatives. Recognize how they experience the various sufferings that have been explained. Then, having seen all sentient beings as equal, with no difference between them, you should meditate on sentient beings to whom you are indifferent. When the compassion you feel towards them is same as the compassion you feel towards your friends and relatives, meditate on compassion for all sentient beings throughout the 10 directions of the universe, just as a mother in response to her small, beloved, and suffering child. When you develop spontaneous and equal sense of compassion toward all sentient beings, you have perfected the practice of compassion, and this is known as great compassion. Meditate on loving kindness with beings, with friends and people who are fond of. It has the nature of wishing that they meet with suffering. Gradually extend the meditation to include strangers and even your enemies, habituating yourself to compassion. You will gradually generate a spontaneous wish to liberate all sentient beings. Therefore, having familiarized yourself with compassion as the basis, meditate on the awakening mind of Bodhisattva. And then Bodhisattva is of 2 types. So you should have this courage to take the responsibility of helping other sentient beings, and also aspire to do the best you can and to benefit sentient beings. So I always have this sense that all 7 billion people on this earth are equally not wanting suffering but wanting happiness. So of course we do talk about all sentient beings, but practically here we have the 7 billion people to whom we could do something to help them, to serve them, and therefore with this attitude that we are all equal, we're all same in being human beings, we could have this attitude of wanting happiness for others, helping others, because the more you think about helping others, bringing welfare to others, the more you are able to draw your own benefit as well. The more you are selfish all the time, the less you are able to draw your own benefit as well. And so if you are imbued with this altruistic attitude to bring benefit to others, you are always friendly with others. You can consider others to be your friends all the time. As Lama Chöpa, the Guru Puja says, the self-cherishing attitude is the root of all misfortunes. And cherishing others, the attitude of cherishing others, is the source of all benefit and good. And in Bodhisattva Charyavatara also it says, what need is there more to say? Look at the Buddhas who were dedicated, who worked by dedicating themselves for the welfare of others, and look at the sentient beings who are childish, the difference between them. So if you remain selfish, as Bodhisattva Charyavatara says, if you are not able to exchange your joy and happiness with the suffering of others, live alone attaining Buddhahood, even in samsara you will not have happiness. And so the suffering that people have on this earth are rooted in the people's self-cherishing, extreme self-cherishing attitude. Please take the tea. So that's the. So when you have a very strong wish to help others, of course you would reflect that although you have this wish to help others, the thought to help others, the spirit to help others, but you do not have the ability to help others. But if you are able to train yourself in the Bodhisattva path, the Bodhisattva practices, such as giving, for example, within which you can have the practice of giving material things, giving dharma, and giving fearlessness. So you could do, to the best of your ability, what you can at this time. And also giving advice to people as to how to avoid negative actions and cultivate positive ones, and so forth. And so these are things that we can do. And then with regard to the morality, there is the morality of restraint. And if you are able to do this well, then you will be able to do the next practice of morality, which is gathering dharma, well. And then when that goes well, then you will be able to do serve others, the morality of serving other sentient beings as well. As Master Tsongkhapa says, this dharma that I've realized, may I be able to use it to serve others. And then there is the patience, accepting suffering, and then accepting the understanding of the emptiness and so forth. And so with regard to bodhicitta, of course, it is a very positive state of mind with which you actually focus your mind on enlightenment, aspiring to attain enlightenment, Buddhahood, for the benefit of all sentient beings. So bodhicitta is two types, conventional and ultimate. Conventional bodhicitta is the cultivation of initial thought that aspires to attain unsurpassable, perfectly consummate Buddhahood in order to benefit all surrounding beings after having taken the vow of compassion to release all of them from suffering. That conventional bodhicitta should be cultivated in the process. Now, similar to that described in the chapter on moral ethics, in the Bodhisattva Bhumi, generating this mind by taking the Bodhisattva vows before a master who abides by the Bodhisattva precepts. After generating conventional awakening mind of bodhicitta, endeavor to cultivate the ultimate awakening mind of bodhicitta. The ultimate bodhicitta is transcendental and free from all elaborations. It is extremely clear, the object of the ultimate, stainless, unwavering, like the butter lamp undisturbed by the wind. This is achieved through the constant and respectful familiarity with the yoga of calm abiding meditation, and especially insight over a long period of time, the unraveling of thought. A sutra says, O Maitreya, you must know that all the virtuous dharmas of hearers, bodhisattvas, and tathagatas, whether worldly or transcendental, are the fruits of combining meditation and special insight. Since all kinds of concentrations can be included in these two, all yogis must at all times seek combining meditation and special insight. And so I may not be able to finish this text today, but since you have the text, you can read on your own and try to understand. Again, the Unraveling of the Thought Sutra says the Buddha has said, it must be known that the teachings of the various types of concentration sought by hearers, bodhisattvas, and tathagatas are all contained in combining meditation and special insight. Yogis cannot eliminate mental obscuration merely by familiarizing themselves with abiding meditation alone. It will not only suppress the disturbing emotions and delusions temporarily. So His Holiness is saying that there are some typos in the text in Tibetan. So in the King of Concentration Sutra also says, even if you meditate with single-pointed concentration, you will not destroy the misconceptions of self, and your disturbing emotions will disturb you again. This is like Udraka's single-pointed meditation, when the selfless phenomena is examined specifically, and meditations are performed on the basis of that analysis. That is the cause of the resultant liberation. No other cause can bring peace. Also, the Bodhisattva section of Bodhisattva Bhumi Sutra, Bodhisattva Pitaka Sutra says, those who haven't heard these various teachings of Bodhisattva collection and have also not heard the implemented teaching of monastic discipline, who think that single-point concentration alone is enough, will fall into the pit of arrogance due to pride. As such, they cannot gain complete release from rebirth, old age, sickness, death, misery, lamentation, suffering, mental unhappiness, and disturbances. Neither do they gain complete liberation from the cycle of 6 states of existence, nor from the heaps of suffering, mental and physical aggregates. Keeping this in mind, that the Tathagata has said that the hearing of the teaching will help you gain liberation from the old age and death. For these reasons, those who wish to attain thoroughly purified transcendental wisdom by eliminating all obscurations should meditate on wisdom while remaining in calm, abiding meditation. The Heap of Jewels Sutra says single-pointed concentration is achieved by adhering to moral ethics. With the achievement of single-pointed concentration, you meditate on wisdom. Wisdom helps you to attain pure, pristine awareness. Through pure, pristine awareness, your moral conduct is perfected. So this text tells us that we need both single-pointed concentration and single-pointed concentration, which is shamatha, which is not affected by those of the mental sinking and mental excitation. So free from these two faults or impediments, you should be able to stay on the object that you have chosen as your focus, while being able to do this critical analysis into the nature of things. So on the one hand, you should be able to maintain your focus, but it must not be tinged with mental sinking and excitement, which is a disturbance or distraction to sensual objects. And so the mind should be very alert, and while being able to maintain the stability. And then, with regard to special insight, what it means is that though things are impermanent, we perceive them to be impermanent. We perceive them to be permanent. Those things which are in the nature of suffering, we perceive them as being blissful, pleasurable, and those filthy to be unfilthy, clean, and those without self to have self. And so you need to meditate on these points of impermanence and so forth, instead of the opposites. And then you cultivate those of the worldly special insight. And the unique teaching of the Buddha with regard to this insight that you have to focus on is the selflessness. So it's not enough just to be able to repeat selflessness. But what you need to actually know is that the meaning of that word, selflessness, is that things do not exist the way they appear to us. And so you should be able to find and see for yourself that though things do appear in a certain way, and from your own experience you can tell that they do not have that way of existence. So with regard to selflessness, there is the selflessness in the sense of things do not having no self-sufficiently substantial existence. So in the Lamrim text, when they introduce the view of selflessness, they give this analogy whereby you are told to actually feel or bring up in your mind a state whereby a kind of an incident where you were blamed for stealing something, even though you didn't steal anything from that other person. At that point, what kind of sense of I you have? But that seems to be pointing to leading to that of the realization of selflessness, in the sense that the self does not have any self-sufficient substantial existence. But we must go deeper with regard to selflessness. So it is said that selflessness, clinging to the self in the aggregates, leads us to have clinging to self of a person. So grasping at the self of phenomena is said to be the root of the self, grasping at self of persons. So we are talking about this special insight which sees the nature, the final nature of things as it is. So although you may have some understanding of emptiness before you have developed single-pointed concentration, that understanding of selflessness is not special insight as such. But when you develop this insight into emptiness on the basis of single-pointed concentration, then that is called special insight. So although you may have some experience, some kind of experience of the final nature of things, but without this single-pointed concentration, you still does not have the special insight into this selflessness. So initially, yogis which seek the prerequisites that can assist him in actualizing karma body meditation and insight quickly and easily. The prerequisites necessary for the development of karma abiding meditation are to live in conscious environment, to limit your desires and practice contentment, to not be involved in too many activities to maintain pure moral ethics and to fully eliminate attachment, and all kinds of conceptual thoughts. A conducive environment should be known by 5 characteristics and so forth. So these So therefore maintain yogic practice of them both. And then the next comes the cultivating the prerequisites for calm abiding and insight. And then you are taught to go through the paths of accumulation, part of preparation or application, and then the part of seeing and meditation and so forth, during which you go through the Bodhisattva grounds, and how you are able to overcome the negative emotions, and then from the 8th ground onwards, how you would work to overcome those of the cognitive obscuration of knowledge. So we'll leave it there and then move to the 37 practices of Bodhisattvas. So the book that if you have the book that was distributed, it's on page 54. So the 37 practices of Bodhisattvas, homage to Avalokiteshvara, I prostrate always respectfully through my 3 gateways to the Supreme Gurus and Guardian Avalokiteshvara, who, seeing that all phenomena having no coming and going, make efforts singly for the benefit of wandering beings. And so this is a homage. This verse pays homage to the lineage Gurus, and to have faith and admiration of one's second masters, who are under the sway of compassion and bodhicitta, and therefore the real Avalokiteshvara is a reference to having the ultimate experience of compassion. And so those who practice compassion are the ones who are also doing practice of Avalokiteshvara. So what is the special quality of Lama and Avalokiteshvara is that they make effort or put effort or work singly for the benefit of sentient beings. And so by seeing the faults of self-cherishing attitude and the advantages and the positive qualities of cherishing others and holding others to be dearer than oneself, and having cultivated and familiarized themselves with these, they dedicate themselves for the benefit of others. So how have they been able to have that kind of courage to work for the other sentient beings? Whatever suffering there may be that we have covered earlier, the 3 types of suffering, for example, they are all rooted in this true grasping at true existence of things. And once you see that it can be overcome, then you will have a very special wish and the courage to work for eliminating suffering of others. Otherwise, your wish may just remain a prayer. So, for example, if you see someone being carried away by a strong current of river, and you find that there's no way you could help the person at all, you could just feel sorry for the person. But if you actually see a way for the person to be out of that current, to come out of that, then you will actually try to see whether you, how you can actually help that person. So similarly, when you are able to see the possibility for sentient beings to be rid of their suffering, you would think actually aspire to work towards that. Otherwise, if you don't see any way out of the suffering, then you will just feel sorry for them. So of all the different sentient beings, those to whom you can directly do something are those of the human beings on this earth for us. And within this world, there are those of the animals, birds, and so forth. But for them, we can only make our prayers and wish them to have happiness. So if you can think along these lines, that the human beings are the ones we could do something about in terms of helping them overcome their suffering and give them happiness, then we would actually engage in the actions to help them. And when you see the reality of things, which is emptiness of inherent or independent existence things, you'll be able to see that the grasping at true independent existence and things and self is something that you can actually overcome, because it's distorted view. And therefore, you will, since you see the possibility of overcoming it, you'll work towards overcoming it in other sentient beings as well. As Master Nagarjuna says in his salutation verses in Mula Madhyamaka Karika, with regard to dependent origination, the Buddha taught being free from extremes. Although things arise and cease, they come and go, there is identity and difference. In conventional terms, yet, when you actually search for that coming and going or arising and cessation and so forth, in the objects themselves, you will not be able to find anything. And therefore, if you could check the nature of things on the basis of their cause, as well as the nature, the identity, and their results, nothing can be found to be the cause or action or identity and result and so forth. And also similarly with regard to oneself, you will not be able to find yourself within the aggregates, the mind and the body. And within the body, with regard to the body itself, what is the body? Of course, it has all these parts. Apart from the parts, you cannot have some entity called the body. And without the parts, you cannot have a whole as such. And then with regard to the action, agent, and the object, you cannot have an action without the actor, the agent, and without the object, you cannot have the action and the agent, and without the action and the agent, you cannot have the object acted upon, and so forth. And similarly with regard to time, past, future, and present, cannot be pinpointed. Without present, you cannot talk about past and future, and without the past, you cannot talk about present and future, and so forth. And so nothing whatsoever has any objective independent existence. But we have this totally distorted notion of how things exist. And because of that, we create the exaggerated outlook on things, and they in turn lead us to create karma. And because of our karma, we do suffer. And therefore, you need to, if you are able to understand that all these have cause and conditions, that the clinging to true existence in things is the root of all our problems, then you'll see that it's possible, and that you see that it's possible to overcome it, then you will have compassion towards others as well, because you see the possibility for them to be free from all this clinging to true existence. And so, fully enlightened Buddhas, the source of benefit and happiness, have come about from their having actualized the hallowed Dharma. Moreover, since dependent on their having known what its practices are, I shall explain the Bodhisattva practices. And regarding the verse number 1, a Bodhisattva's practice is at this time when we obtain. Now that you have obtained the precious human body, the great boat so difficult to find, in order to free yourself and others from this ocean of suffering, to listen, reflect, and meditate with diligence day and night is the practice of a Bodhisattva. And then the second verse. So the first verse actually shows that we need to engage in the practices of listening, reflecting, meditating on the teaching in order to make this human life meaningful. And then the second verse teaches us to abandon our homeland, which in turn means that we need to actually do away with attachment to one's homeland. So passion towards friends churns like water, hatred towards enemies burns like fire. Through dark ignorance, one forgets what to adopt and what reject. To abandon one's homeland is the practice of a bodhisattva. Although we may abandon or we may leave our homeland, but if we remain the same without making any change within ourselves in terms of overcoming our attachment, anger, and so forth, then what's the point of leaving one's homeland? Because even if you may be in a high land, in a hermitage, you are still the same person. And therefore, what this means is to overcome one's attachment and anger. So when we first came into exile, we had really nothing. Where we moved, when Tibetans were moved to South Indian Tibetan settlements, people were, it was very easy for people to move places because they didn't have much possessions. And so, once you are settled in a certain place, then you also tend to accumulate more and more things. And then, because of that, there's attachment and the clinging and so forth, which happens. And therefore, if you are not able to tame your mind wherever you are, it doesn't help being somewhere away from your homeland as such. Rather than moving away from your homeland, it would be better to stay and remain in the homeland while being able to practice the Dharma sincerely in overcoming one's attachment, anger, and so forth. So, with regards to the practice of Dharma, one first hears the teaching, and having heard the teaching, you would reflect on it and critically analyze the meaning and then thinking over and over again and reflecting on the meaning, one gains conviction in the teaching, the meaning, and then you familiarize your mind with that object that you have gained certainty of, and then you familiarize your mind and gain experience of the teaching. Giving up in inhospitable places, mental afflictions gradually decrease. unfavorable places. With the no distraction, virtuous activities naturally increase. When mind becomes clear, conviction in the Dharma is born. Therefore, seeking solitude is the practice of a Bodhisattva. So old friends and relatives will separate. Possessions gained with exertion will be left behind. So because of our attachment and so forth, what we have done is cause more suffering to others. For example, in the case of the past Indian kings or Chinese emperors, I mean, they have actually caused so much suffering to people to build the great monuments like the Great Wall of China and so forth. And consciousness, the guest, will leave the guest house of the body. And so we go through the process of aging, and then finally death comes. So hundreds of thousands, millions of people have lived in this world, but none of them have lived forever. And then in our day-to-day life, if we live our life more or less swayed by our desire towards the pleasures of this life, nothing of the Dharma has worked in us. So if you think that you would actually finish off with all the mundane chores and then, I mean, this month, this day, this month, and this year, and so forth, and then I will do the Dharma practice. I mean, there will not come a time when you'll be able to do the Dharma practice. Therefore, do practice the Dharma here and now. You don't need to change places. You don't need to change your body. You need to actually think about the negative consequences of your negative emotions, the consequences of negative emotions and the consequences of the positive emotions, and then accordingly apply the positive ones to overcome the negative ones. When friendship with someone causes the three poisons to increase, degrades the activities of listening, reflecting, meditating, and destroys loving kindness and compassion, to give up such friendship is the practice of a Bodhisattva. When in reliance on someone, your negativities diminish and your positive qualities grow like a waxing moon. To cherish such a spiritual friend more than your own body is the practice of a Bodhisattva. For example, if you have a friend who smokes a lot, then you may go to the person one time or several times, and as you keep going, then you also begin to be tempted to smoke. The late Panchen Rinpoche has said in his speech, in his advice to the Tibetans, thinking that you are actually engaging in something which is modern or revolutionary and so forth. I mean, you may smoke, but that's not what revolution means. To give up such a friendship is the practice of bodhisattvas. So, but then the friend that you actually accompany maybe ones who smoke or are alcoholic and have bad manners, but you may befriend them, but then you should not emulate them. When in reliance on someone, your negativities diminish. And so it's the practice of bodhisattvas. So when you talk about the virtuous spiritual master, they are the ones who actually inspire you to cultivate good manners, good virtuous states of mind. It has nothing to do with big estates and big names. In Kham, there used to be this kind of custom that someone is considered a great Lama if they have big estates and big entourage. But a Lama or a spiritual teacher is someone who have the 10 qualifications as given in Sutra Alankara. Being subdued, thoroughly pacified, pacified and thoroughly pacified, and so forth. And so these are the qualities that are to be, you should look for them in the person whom you consider as your spiritual guru. So over 20 years ago, I met a Chinese from mainland China who told me that there were people from Tibet who came to China proper, claiming to be king of Dharma. But as time went by and they actually they checked what these so-called Dharma kings wanted was money and women. And so he asked me if I could do something from here. I said, I can't do anything from here, but what you need to know is the qualifications of a spiritual teacher, which are given in Sutra Alankara, these 10 qualifications. Sorry. So you need to check whether the person, the so-called Dharma Rajas, have these qualifications or not. Someone may be very famous, but you need to still check if they qualify these criteria of spiritual guru. And Gyalsey Rinpoche in his Lamrim Chemo says that unless one is able to tame and subdue one's own mind, there is no way one can actually tame others. So those who wish to tame others first must tame themselves. And then, with regard to the method of taming oneself and others, it is not sufficient to have someone who is able to who is able to predict future through more divination well and so forth. It's not sufficient. They need to be ones who are able to actually employ the teaching of the Buddha correctly. And so what that means is that they need to be well-versed in the 3 trainings of morality, concentration, and wisdom. And so the Sutra Alankara, before quoting these the verses from the verse from Sutra Alankara, Gyalsey Rinpoche actually gives this comment. And so someone who is morally sound, and then have single-body concentration, and then also that of the wisdom, and then one who understands the nature of things well, and particularly the understanding of emptiness, and who is actually familiar with the emptiness, either asserted or taught in the Chittamatra or Madhyamaka philosophy. And then someone who does not look for material gains and worldly gains. So there's this saying that when the Lamas give their teachings, they seem to be very intelligent, learned, but when they are actually seen seeking material gains by giving teachings, then I feel very sad. So some Dzogchen Lamas have said that there are, the Dzogchen Lamas who have said that doing Dharma business is very risky, but there are many who do business with Dharma, but they have actually pledged that they will not do any business with Dharma. themselves captives in the prison of samsara. Whom can the worldly gods protect? Therefore, to seek refuge in those who do not betray the three jewels is the practice of a bodhisattva. So we have the practice of propitiating or making offerings to Gyalpo and Zen spirits and so forth. Of course, they themselves are under the sway of their negative emotions, and they are objects of our compassion. So how can they, these worldly gods and so forth, protect us? With regard to the Sangha jewel, of course, the Sangha jewel as the trainee level have not overcome all the negative emotions, but then they have the experience of true Dharma within themselves, and they can help us, assist us on the path. So once you have developed the true Dharma within yourself, comprising true cessation and true path, then you will be someone who is called a true Sangha. And then you are someone who is called an Arya being. And then there is the attainment of Buddhahood. So the three jewels. The suffering of lower realms, so difficult to bear, is what the Buddha taught to be the fruit of negative actions. Therefore, even at the cost of your life, never commit negative actions in the practice is the practice of a bodhisattva. So all of us, whether monks or nuns or lay people, we need to avoid the 10 non-virtuous actions, the 3 of body, taking life, and then stealing and sexual misconduct, and then 4 of speech, lying, telling lies, divisive talk, and harsh language, and also gossip, idle gossip. And then 3 of mind, which are covetousness, wrong view, and malicious thought, and wrong view. And so, through these practice of avoiding the 10 non-virtuous actions, and one could attain higher rebirth, and then on top of that, to have a very an excellent higher existence, you could actually be respectful to others, and not indulge in corruption, not indulge in wrong livelihood. And then giving to others, not with disrespect, but looking down upon them, but respectfully giving alms. Otherwise, sometimes we do tend to be mean towards those whom we give some alms. So we are. I mean, these beggars and ourselves are equal in being the same human beings, and therefore we need to treat them with respect. So give alms with respect, and then you should respect and those who are worthy of respect and veneration. And then, and therefore, the 16 factors for higher rebirth are given in the in Ratnavali, the precious garland by Master Nagarjuna. Happiness in the 3 realms, like dew on a blade of grass, is nature instantly fading away. Is of the nature instantly to strive for the supreme state of liberation that never wavers is the practice of bodhisattvas. So whatever excellence there is in the 3 realms of existence finally wears out. They diminish, and therefore it is said they are like a dew on blade of grass. And then the happiness is in the nature of instantly fading away, which means that this shows that the moment by moment change in disintegration in things, and therefore there's no perfect happiness or pleasure in this cycle of existence. However great blissful experience they may be. So liberation is that state of supreme state of bliss or happiness that never wavers. So once you attain it, there's no falling down from that. And therefore, in order to attain the liberation, one needs to practice the three trainings. The training of wisdom, higher wisdom, which is based on the training of higher concentration, which in turn is based on the training of morality. And then next verse shows the Vayana or Bodhisattva, the practice of bodhicitta. From the beginningless time, your mothers have cherished you. If they now suffer, what good is your own happiness? Therefore, in order to liberate limitless sentient beings, giving rise to bodhicitta is the practice of bodhisattvas. So this verse also teaches us that of the sevenfold instruction of a cause and effect in the process of cultivating bodhicitta. And next verse, all suffering shows that of equaling and exchanging self and one's others. All suffering comes from yearning for your own happiness. The perfect Buddhas are born from the intention to benefit others. Therefore, to truly exchange your own happiness for the suffering of others is the practice of a bodhisattva. Even if someone driven by excessive desire steals all your wealth or incites someone else to steal it, to dedicate to this person your body's possessions and all your virtues of the 3 times is the practice of a bodhisattva. If someone cuts off your head, even when you have not done the slightest wrong thing, through the power of compassion, to take his misdeeds upon yourself is the practice of a bodhisattva. Should someone slander you throughout a billion worlds, with loving heart, to proclaim his good qualities in return is the practice of bodhisattvas. If someone whom you cherish as dearly as your own child takes you for an enemy, then, like a mother whose child is sick, to love that person even more is the practice of a bodhisattva. Even when someone who is your equal or inferior, driven by arrogance, seeks to disparage you, to place him on the crown of your head with the same respect you would accord to your guru, is the practice of a bodhisattva. So in the practice of a bodhisattva, there are the risk of being too proud or being in too low self-esteem. So in order to do away with that, these practices are taught. So verses 21. Sensual pleasure, verse 21, sensual pleasure is like salt, water, and so forth. So verse number 22 shows special insight. In connection with this, I find the Jonang verse, a verse from the Jonang tradition, very good. So which says that when I look at the objects, the perceived objects, they are like illusion. And when I look at the mind itself, they also do not have any intrinsic existence. And so both the subject and the object do not have any intrinsic or independent existence.
All appearances are your own mind, and mind itself primarily transcends all mental fabrications. Knowing this and to remain free from apprehending the signs of objects and subjects is the practice of a bodhisattva. When you encounter objects that please your mind, like rainbows in the summer season, though they seem beautiful, not to view them as real and to give up attachment to them is the practice of a bodhisattva. Then the next verses show those of the practice of 6 perfections. The perfection of giving, perfection of morality, perfection of patience, the perfection of joyous effort, the perfection of concentration. So with regard to the perfection of concentration, the text says, Vipassana perfectly endowed with shamatha completely and conquers all afflictions. Knowing this and to cultivate meditative concentration, this must be coupled with bodhicitta as well. That transcends the 4 formless states is the practice of a bodhisattva. So if we are not careful with our dealings with other people and our behavior, and even though we may be wearing the monastic robes, we could be hypocrites. Without wisdom, it is not possible to attain perfect enlightenment. Through the first 5 practices of perfection alone, equipped with skillful means and to cultivate the wisdom of non-conceptualizing of 3 spheres, is the practice of bodhisattva. If you do not analyze your own fault, you might put on a dharmic facade while behaving in a non-dharmic way. Therefore, to continually analyze your fault and then discard it as it is the bodhisattva practice. Discard it is the practice of a bodhisattva. If compelled by your own afflictions, you speak of the faults of other bodhisattvas, you yourself will degenerate. Therefore, never citing the faults of others who have entered the Mahayana path is the practice of a bodhisattva. Desire for gain and service leads to mutual arguments, and activities of listening, reflecting, meditating decline. Therefore, to relinquish attachment to the households of friends, relatives, donors is the practice of a bodhisattva. Harsh words disturb the minds of others and disintegrate the bodhisattva's contact. Therefore, to give up harsh and unpleasant speech to others is the practice of a bodhisattva. Once you have become accustomed to afflictions, they are hard to undermine with antidotes. Therefore, with the remedial weapons of mindfulness introspection, to forcefully eliminate afflictions as attachment, the moment they arise is the practice of a bodhisattva. In brief, wherever you are and whatever you do, always examine the state of your own mind, cultivate continuously to benefit others is the practice of a bodhisattva. And so, Someone has finished this book. So with regard to the other texts, the stages of meditation, I received the teaching on it from the Sakya abbot, Sangye Tenzin Rinpoche. So he told me that he received the teaching when he was going from Lhasa to Samye, and then on the way, when he reached Samye, he actually found that one Dzogchen Lama from Kham was teaching, giving teaching on the stages of meditation in Samye. And Khen Rinpoche, Sangye Tenzin himself didn't know where that Dzogchen Lama came from and who he was and so forth. But whatever the case, he himself, this Abbot Sangye Tenzin, was really qualified teacher, and therefore I received this teaching on the stages of meditation from him. And then the 37 practices of Bodhisattvas, I received the teaching from Kondal Lama Tenzin Gyalsey, and the text that he used. So the previous Labjun Rinpoche had actually sent these texts that I have from Lhasa for me. So I'll teach the three principal aspects of the path tomorrow as a preliminary to the initiation, Avalokiteshvara initiation. So we'll do like that. Okay. Does everyone have the text? So tomorrow also we'll start at the same time as today, at 8:30. Before starting the teaching, I'll actually do the preliminary rituals for the initiation. So the initiation may take the preliminary ritual may take an hour or so. The then the lower mebe temba tang dagen lasam tabe tudop membe tungun de la nyun drop seje gewe changar kangjin shin yongson jachen melam kanze be desan tende nyodo chawa su no chin same tende da chosum tuji tu dan tenzik top leder lu me tendu da ja ge tembe melam geng me nyun drop sho Tunamji, Sayin Tamkulang. Somebody Jerry. Tidro Alal Dera, Panala Kid Sukyum.